Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. A year ago, I would have started this seminar by saying we are about to discuss carbon capture and storage, which should soon be on the top of the agenda of the European Commission as a policy issue. And I don't have to do that anymore. I can now say, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to talk about CCS, which is at the top of the agenda of the European Commission in terms of energy issues. Finally. And we have a terrific group of people to discuss this, really the best group of people I could think of. So Chris Bolester, who is the king of CCS in the European Commission. And it's true, Chris. So Chris, many thanks indeed for joining us, and who's going to explain where we are. Then we have Cedric Meus from Holcim. So Holcim obviously is one of the key expected companies that's going to need CCS, because obviously cement needs it for process emissions and potentially for its energy related emissions in future. So Cedric, many thanks for joining us. And also it's worth pointing out that Holcim is one of the front runners in terms of the debate and actually decarbonising the cement industry. So we're really happy to have you here. Then we have Francis Regis-Mouton, IOGP, which obviously being the king of the oil and gas industry in Europe. I'm not sure you want that crown, Francis Regis, but I'm giving it you today. Then obviously, given the Commission's proposal in the Net Zero Industry Act, that industry be legally obliged to make 50 million tonnes of storage happen by 2030, this is right at the top of our agenda. Then we have Jess Scott from the Hertie School. Jess is well known as one of the, I don't know whether I call you a practitioner, an academic, what I call you, Jess, but she's one of the leading thinkers in the energy area. And we call on her from Florence very often when we want a strong, independent, practical and result-oriented voice. So Jess, thanks so much for joining us. And last and certainly not least, Piotr Kus, the head of NZIA. So obviously, Piotr's members own all the pipelines that almost all of them are going to be used, well, not almost all of them, but almost all of the CCS pipelines will certainly either be repurposed pipelines or will be part of the discussions on how to merge the natural gas grid into the CCS grid, and we know all this story. So this is as topical as it gets. And so first I'd like to invite Chris Bolester. Chris, if you'd like to take us through what's the Commission's thinking about where we're going.
Thanks for inviting me, and hello everyone. It's such a pleasure to be here, because I remember FSR organized an event on CCS last year, and it's been just a year. But we have traveled so much. Same time last year, we didn't have a cross-border transport of CO2 happening. Same time last year, we didn't have 18 candidates to join the PCI list in terms of CO2 transport and storage. And same time last year, we didn't have a proposal on the table to have 50 million tonnes of CO2 storage capacity already in 2030. So, it seems like light speed, especially if you work in the Commission. I've been around for quite some time, and you have human years, dog years, and also Commission years. So this is really, really fast. And now we have all these elements, and we have to put them into a comprehensive strategy. We now call it industrial carbon management strategy, because it needs to cover carbon capture, utilization, storage, also carbon removals from industrial installations. So the strategy will not cover the nature-based solutions, but the carbon removals from the industrial point sources. We are now in the listening mode because the open public consultation has been open a couple of weeks ago, and we're aiming to wrap up in the fourth quarter of this year. So the open public consultation is there. There's call for evidence that is also open. We are running the CCUS Forum that will meet this year, and this is the first time you can hear this. It will meet in Aalborg in Denmark on 27 and 28 of November. So we are continuing our traveling around Europe, showcasing CCS, CCU, and I think Aalborg is a very good place to also have some interesting site visits. So please look out for more details in the coming weeks. I think I just wrap up my first intervention by saying what key priority is for us in DG Energy, because we are cooperating with DG Klima on tabling the strategy. So for us, the key component of the strategy is to prepare the transport market of CO2. This is something that we are really keen on, because we see that the CO2 is a younger sister, younger brother of hydrogen, and even younger of natural gas. So there'll be certainly a lot of lessons learned, how the market should be designed, should be more like hydrogen, more like natural gas. Should we propose tarification on pipelines, on the whole value chain, or maybe just on onshore pipelines, on offshore pipelines? Many questions, regulatory authorities, planning of the infrastructure investment. Should we unbundle the transport from storage? How states should participate in the market? Should it be the designer or investor? How they, for example, you have the Danish example where state is taking part in each storage site, 20%. And there's many questions that we hope to get answers from the public consultation, but also there'll be plenty of meeting like this one. And I thank you for organizing this, because it also feeds into our work. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Chris, many thanks. Couple of questions to kick off, and if the audience have questions for Chris and the other audience, please post them in the Q&A or the chat, and I'll be happy to pass them on. So if I think back to 2020, when we had the hydrogen strategy, I think that's right, 2020, and you think how far hydrogen's come in 3 years, and if I think what happened after the hydrogen strategy, so in the hydrogen strategy, you kind of had your targets, 10 million tons. Then you had industry, which did the backbone. Then you had the legislation. Then you had, at the same time, all the project development in terms of IPCEIs, member states pushing it really hard in terms of the national energy and climate plans, which, if I'm right, they're going to be revised at the end of this year with finalisation next year. Do you see the same train happening in relation to CCS now, so that in 2026, right, so hydrogen strategy 2023, we're now at the end of, sorry, 2020, we're now at the end of 2023, and the landscape is almost completely changed in terms of hydrogen. We're coming towards the end of concluding the gas package, kneecaps, all the rest of it. Do you expect that in 2026 we'll be in a exactly parallel position in terms of CCS as the hydrogen development? The same thing, that we'll have legislation in place, doing third-party access, unbundling. I'm not saying it's going to be the same. I'm not saying it's copy paste. That will have a CCS backbone, that industry will be investing, that will have member states really taking it seriously. Do you expect that?
I expect that we will be more, in terms of CCS, we'll have a more extended timeline. So we are now moving at speed, and I think we are moving faster than we did on hydrogen. So for example, the 50 million tons target in Net Zero Industry Act is ahead of the strategy. So we already have a piece of legislation on the table without considering the strategy first, because it's such a big priority. And why I'm saying it will be more extended, because having completed work on the target, we'll have the European elections, which will put a sort of a little break on the work, because we can't propose, the Commission cannot propose any legislation in the last year of this Commission, and probably the new Commission will need some time to settle down. So I think in terms of practicalities, we'll be moving slower in this next period, but we've advanced the work so much on with the Net Zero Industry Act, and we are looking into what kind of activities we can also propose and do in this kind of lame duck season, that I think will be in a very similar position in 26, because we've advanced so much over the last couple of months.
So can I ask, how did the Commission come up with, what was the thinking it took behind the Net Zero Industry Act? Because that came, at least for me, that was a shot out of the blue. This was, I'm never expecting that one. How did the Commission come out? How did the Commission, or what's the thinking of the Commission behind that, both in terms of the 50 million tons? Are we going to get 80 million tons? Because I noticed that the Net Zero Industry Act is under the internal market legal basis, which means it has EEA relevance. So if I understand correctly, once adopted, it will automatically be part of the EA, or quasi-automatically, which means therefore, by definition, Norway will be included, therefore Equinor will be included. Therefore, if you add up the amount of oil and gas produced by Equinor compared to within the EU, I don't know whether it's double or triple or whatever it is. So will we have higher targets? What's the thinking on that? And will the storage obligation, because obviously there's a lot of, we're all looking at it and thinking, well, what about the North Sea? Because that's where you're going to store everything, but that's excluded. So how's this all going to work as we move forward on the NZIA?
So first, how the Commission came up with well, why CCS is there in the first place? I think it's a good question, because it's not a manufacturing technology. It doesn't exactly follow the other net zero strategic projects. But when discussing the draft, we realized that when you want to do decarbonization of industries and you want to promote manufacturing of net zero technologies, you should also look at hard to abate sectors that will be affected by the transition. And there's many moving pieces in the coming years. So the free allocation under the EU ETS is going away. There's CBAM, so there's a new thing. There's a ramp up of ETS price after the latest reforms. So there's more challenges for hard to abate sectors, and we want to keep them in Europe. So we thought, okay, so we should provide incentives for manufacturers into green technologies, but also we should make sure we do all possible to keep hard to abate sectors that could use CCS. in Europe. And the first step to do that is to provide them with some certainty or some de-risking of the capture investment, because we still have the famous chicken and egg dilemma, where storage investors would not move first because they're not sure the captured CO2 will be on the market. And for the capture installation, it's the same. They would not invest in capture because they are not sure storage will be there. So by including the storage obligation, the storage target in Net Zero Industry Act, we thought, okay, let's try to break this catch-22 situation and provide some certainty for capture installations. So that's why. Why 50? That's quite simple. We analyze constantly all the potential projects on the market, and for the EU, announced projects already amount to around 80 million tons for 2030, which is a astonishing figure if you consider where we were a couple of years ago. And we also saw that there was a declaration from IOGP companies to have an ambition for 500 million, 500 million tons of storage capacity. So we thought that 50 million tons is a realistic figure for 2030. And sorry, last bit, very briefly on EEA. Yes, it's kind of automatic when the regulations agreed by the EU co-legislators. Then the negotiation with EEA kick in, and they could join, and then we'll sit down and negotiate the target. So it's not automatic that the same methodology of agreeing the target will be extended to Norway, for example, but we have to negotiate.
Okay. So one of the biggest challenges, it always seems to me, and you read this a lot, is getting the full chain to work. I mean, by solving or potentially solving part of the storage problem, or creating that, you created the storage, which is great. But if you don't have the rest, it's like building Disneyland and they're not building any roads to actually let people go into Disneyland. So that doesn't work. So, I mean, the real trick is to get the full chain to work in harmony, so that Cedric is investing in CCS capture at massive scale. Piotr's members and whomsoever is investing massively in the pipelines. And then Francois Régis members or whomsoever is investing massively in storage all at the same time, and it magically comes together in a seamless, brilliant system that is cost effective, well coordinated, and meets the decarbonisation requirements. How has the Commission got the magic answer on this one?
Well, I don't think. No, we don't. We don't deal with magic, unfortunately. I would love to, but no. I think that we also believe in the wisdom of co-legislators. I see that in the dialogue with the Council, there's a proposal to include transport and storage as part of projects of strategic projects of whatever they call that, I forgot. But this is the bit that they want to add. So you will have your motorways, your transport system that could be built in sync, should be built in sync. And we are trying to continue supporting transport and storage now, network development through the PCI and PMI list. So now it's not the project of common interest, but also of mutual interest, including third countries, EEA countries. And yes, I think it will not be by magic, but by hard work and good coordination. And let's hope we'll get there.
Right. Many thanks, Chris. I've got one last question for you from Michael Buxman in the audience. And this is actually, for me, really interesting. So he says, almost 30 years since the first major CCS plants came online, about 80% of the more of the carbon being captured is used to produce more oil through enhanced oil recovery. So about 80% of all the projects that are actually working. So some of the largest projects now being planned worldwide to store their CO2 via enhanced oil recovery. And in the ES, where most CCS projects are in operation, enhanced oil recovery is central to how these facilities work. And Biden government has given them generous tax breaks. I didn't know that was in the Inflation Reduction Act. Perhaps it is. So the question is, what's happening on CCS and enhanced oil recovery in Europe? I mean, this is obviously, the Commission is always tricky or the EU always finds it tricky when we're going to use CCS to permanently store carbon in order to produce more oil. It doesn't really sound very European. But on the other hand, if we are storing CCS or CO2, and we were going to be pumping something else in order to get enhanced oil recovery, I don't know. So is there a thinking on this in the Commission?
Well, I think we passed the thinking phase on this. So unless the co-legislators decide otherwise, EOR and enhanced gas recovery as well, they're explicitly excluded from the Net Zero Industry Act target. So you have to provide the 50 million tons, but you're not allowed to do EOR. That's pretty simple. The CCS directive, which has been in place for many years now, providing framework for safe storage of CO2, also excludes EOR. So in Europe, it's not something that we do, and I know that in Norway it's also a government deal not to do EOR. So I think in Europe this avenue has been closed.
Crystal clear. Many thanks, Chris. Chris, will you be able to stay for the rest of the seminar?
Yes, this is like an additional public consultation for me.
Brilliant. So the other speakers, if you have questions to torture Chris with, please go ahead, but after your interventions, otherwise we're just going to spend our time torturing Chris. So the rest of the speakers, I'd like to take in alphabetical order. So Cedric, as Chris said, the cement industry itself has got a bit of a challenge because you're losing your free ETS allowances, and decarbonising without CCS, certainly for you, will be a bit of a challenge. So how do you see the priorities here? What needs to be done? What are your thinkings on this?
Look, carbon capture, usage and storage is an undeniable part of the net zero trajectory. And let me say at the outset here, the less we need to capture, the better, because it's expensive to capture, transport, use, and store. So we need to be efficient. And the only way it would work is if we work on all other emissions that we can abate, from fuel, from process, through energy efficiency, through fuel switching, you name it, and only capture the unavoidable emissions that technology does not, other than CCUS, does not allow us to capture. So it's not a way out to continue business as usual. It's a solution for unavoidable emissions. Now, the regulatory framework that Chris and his colleagues are writing is fundamental. CCUS projects, at least in the cement industry, amounts to hundreds of millions of investments, depending on the project, but hundreds of millions that will end up into a green premium at the end of the day on the products that we put on market. So we need to remain competitive vis-a-vis non-EU imports that do not have carbon costs. And that's why we've always been fully supportive of the Commission's plans to develop a carbon border adjustment mechanism that is workable, that is watertight, so to speak, so that circumvention routes are closed, and that it really serves the purpose of creating a CO2 cost equivalence for European domestic producers and importers alike. And if that means that there is an evolution of the regulatory framework and the ETS by phasing out free alliances, well, so be it. That's a new way of organizing the legislation fit for the net zero economy and the transition that industry needs to go through. The way it is proposed, in our view, is the right way. It's not to cut free allowances in one go. It's to transition over a number of years so you don't create an economic shock that no industry could ever absorb, but you do it in a rational way so we can invest, keep competitiveness, and undergo this transition over a number of years. The second element is, contrary to what I've heard earlier this week in another such forum, CCUS is not a plug-and-play technology family, not at all. We control some parts of the processes and technology better than other, but every project is different because of the legislative framework. For example, in Spain, you cannot store geologically, whether offshore or onshore, which means you can only capture and use the CO2 that you capture. If you are in the pre-Alps, you are very far away from any transport hub and storage technology. So you need to find a different value chain. And every project has to build a carbon management value chain that in most cases does not exist. And that needs to be developed. And I don't mean that as a negative statement. It's a fact. It's a fact. It just doesn't exist and we need to build. And the easy bit is almost the capture technology, because we control that one is technology and there are technology providers and we can scale up, although it's not done anyway yet, but we can do it. It's once you've captured it, how do you best manage it in a way that is affordable and where you can remain competitive and find a competitive way of best using and or storing your carbon. And that brings me to the question you asked to Chris, how do you operate the magic to have investments across the full value chain at the same time and coordinated? That's through projects, large scale projects. In our view, what Europe should focus on is financing large scale, highly mature projects that play the catalyst role of developing or of making this magic happen. And let me give you an example with the Go for Zero project we have for our Aubourg plant in Belgium. This is a very old and large cement plant, which used to be Europe's largest. It's almost a green field with state-of-the-art technology. We will capture, it'll be defossilized, it'll be carbon neutral. Managing the carbon that we capture requires the development of a partnership with Fluxys, which is Belgium's gas operator. Simply put, do you happen to have a spare pipeline in which we can transport this CO2? And then bringing that to Antwerp-at-Sea, which is the terminal that will prepare the gas for transporting it for storage in the North Sea, and then involving Air Liquide, who is the technology provider that enables us to transform the gas in a way that it can be transported, and so on and so forth. So these projects are catalysts because Fluxys will not only invest for us, but will invest for the region. That's the first project, and that will enable other industries to do the same and join that pipeline and create a volume of CO2 transport that justifies the investments. So the message here is really, let's invest in large-scale projects that are highly mature, that have mature value chains prepared to invest at scale. I use another project which was part of the second call for the innovation fund in Legadorf, Carbon to Business. This is part of the hydrogen economy. The total investment there is 2.5 billion euros for a green hydrogen economy, and we are only one part of it, but it's a massive project with all the infrastructure that comes that comes with it. And then the last point I will say, and then I'll pause. And Chris knows this very well, because I've been telling him that many times, is that for these projects to be implemented and financeable with all the uncertainties that we have, not only technological, but also in terms of, carbon price and so on and so forth, we need a certain degree of flexibility. We need a regulatory framework that, governs the whole thing, but we need flexibility. We need flexibility in whether we use the CO2 in value chains, and in the short term, there will be a re-emission, perhaps sometimes along the route, depending if you produce e-fuel, of course, there is a re-emission. And it's all about carbon accounting, the carbon accounting framework. How will it work? It's an absolutely fundamental pieces of the legislation and our business case. In some countries, as I said earlier on, you cannot store geologically, so you have to use. And so let's ensure that the framework gives us enough flexibility to build projects today, not in 10 years, today. We are financing permitting projects as we speak. And we need that flexibility for these projects to go ahead and be able to live their life, even though they're not perfect. But here we're talking long term. We'll need hundreds of millions of storage capacity in Europe. As we evolve, and the Net Zero Industry Act and the 15 million tons is great news. It's fantastic. And this will evolve. This will take time. This will evolve. So let's start today. Let's not wait for the ideal setup. Let's start today. Let's be entrepreneurial and promote these large scale and mature projects that are on the table today. I'll pause here, Christopher. You're muted.
Thanks, Cedric. That was brilliant. Is the CBAM good enough to give you the security you need from imports and enable you to invest in these technologies?
Well, is it the silver bullet? I don't know. It doesn't exist yet. It's not. It doesn't exist anywhere in the world. So let's see. On paper, the CBAM provides us, in theory, the tool that is needed to ensure that we have a CO2 cost equivalence, and making sure that our investment results in us being able to put cement and concrete and other materials on the market in a competitive way. So in theory, yes, it will work. And I'm just here voicing the opinion of Holcim and to a large extent the cement sector. I know other industrial sector have different views because the way their value chain works is very different. But for our materials and for our sector, by and large, it should work. It's all in the implementation and the work that Chris's colleagues are currently doing, making sure that all the accounting rules function, making sure that the customs authorities are appropriately equipped, making sure that all circumvention routes are effectively closed, and that the tool actually serves its purpose. If all of that is ensured, in principle, it should work.
Okay. I mean, in the past, the argument for not doing anything on CCS was, well, the ETS will sort it out. You've got an ETS price, and now CBAM is there. You will be progressively fully exposed to the CBAM. You'll lose your free certificates. Isn't the ETS enough in order to push you to invest? And if the answer is no, not yet, what sort of price do you need in order to really say, well, okay, folks, we've got to do it?
Look, the ETS was is a tool that has been working for the last few years, but the history has shown that is a tool that is not very flexible, and we don't know what's ahead of us, but we've been through the life of ETS through major economic crises, and the ETS has not been able to adapt to this macroeconomic financial crisis. And that's what's called the falters in the EU ETS, and not because one sector or the other was clever, but because the system was not adaptable to the macroeconomic developments that the world lives through. So the ETS system has never been the ideal system, but it's currently playing the role that it should be playing, making investments in hard-to-abate sectors and ETS sectors attractive, and incentivizing investment in decarbonization as opposed to business as usual. Now, is it enough? No, it's not enough. ETS is a mechanism that does not impact in any way, shape, or form the behavior of importers. It aims to provide a certain level of, in inverted comma, CO2 cost protection to domestic players, but it does not influence the behavior of importers. So I think moving towards a more holistic mechanism where we can actually create competitive advantage on the European market for decarbonized materials is the way to go. Because ultimately, what's the aim of the game? Is it to decarbonize cement? No, it's to decarbonize construction. And to decarbonize construction, you need to create demand for low carbon materials, cement, steel, glass, and all other materials, and make sure that these decarbonized solutions are more competitive on the market while providing the technical necessities that we need for construction, safety, and so on. And so I think that requires innovation in the regulatory framework, and CBAM is part of it. Is it the silver bullet? Probably not. The future will tell. But it's part of the regulatory tool that will work at least for our sector, and will complement, because the ETS does not disappear. The ETS will remain. It's just a free allowances mechanism that will disappear. So I think a just combination of those two tools should help. And as I said, I think the main point here is starting to address the behavior of the value chain and creating demand for low carbon materials, because that's a key part of our business case, if you want. And that's what our CEO is always asking those project managers who develop CCUS project. It's not just the front load capex. It's like, who's going to buy this product? Where is your demand? What are the building codes doing in the market where you are? Do we have a market to sell decarbonized cement, concrete, and other products? So that's a fundamental element that the EU regulatory framework starts to address.
This is a question I've been wanting to ask somebody like you for ages. And you're probably the perfect person to ask it, because you have both process emissions and emissions from the use of energy. One of the questions that always comes up when you discuss CCS is, well, will people really need it? Can't we just electrify industry? Can't we use renewable hydrogen in terms of energy use in particular? So what's your take on the relative competitiveness of decarbonizing in industries such as yours through alternatives to CCS, notably renewable hydrogen?
So renewable hydrogen is great, but it's not going to solve our problem as far as the cement industry is concerned, because some 60% of our emissions are process emissions and not linked to fuel. So it's the burning of the limestone where you separate calcar from carbon. So the fuel is not going to solve the problem. So it's great to solve 30 to 40% of our emissions, and we're working on it. We have many different options. My colleagues in Resna in Austria are working at 98% non-fossil fuel. That's waste, non-recyclable waste-derived fuel with biomass fractions and so on. There are different possibilities, and green hydrogen is part of it. and we're working on it, but that's the easy bit, if you want. The question is also electrifying, fine, but the pressure on the energy that will be required to decarbonize energy industry as a whole, but the economy as a whole is massive. If I just look at our industry, our energy intensity for decarbonizing is going to pretty much double. So, and I'm saying this will be responded by renewable energy. I mentioned the Go for Zero project in Aubourg in Belgium. We've just built a massive 10-hectare solar plants, floating solar plants on a lake we own in partnership with Total. This is the kind of investment we need to make sure that we have access to renewable energy, sufficient and competitive renewable energy to decarbonize. So I think we need to look at the whole system as a whole. And today we do not have the confidence, and I only speak for Holcim here, we do not have the confidence that you can electrify at scale in one go at the speed that we need to go. So we need to explore all possibilities, always to reduce our energy, waste heat recovery where we can, defossilize and go to waste-derived fuels, unrecyclable waste-derived fuels where we can, and so on and so forth. And in some regions, in some plants, it will include green hydrogen when it will become available, but it's not a silver bullet.
Many thanks, Cedric. I've about another 25 questions for you, but time does not permit. Francois Regis, we are really looking forward to hear the response of the oil and gas industry, not least to the Net Zero Industry Act.
Many thanks, Chris. I would say, first of all, we're very, very happy that, as you said, CCS is finally on the radar screen of policymakers, and that was absolutely key. It's coming a bit too late, I must say. A bit is an understatement, but finally it's on, and that's absolutely key. So we are celebrating this first. When it comes to the target of 50 million tons, it will be difficult to achieve, and I will explain why. And finally, what we want to achieve at all costs, if I may say, is to have stranded assets. We don't need, as you were mentioning before, Chris, if we have the end of the road, but the road not being built, that doesn't help. But I think everybody mentioned that, and that's one of our main objectives. We don't want to, and we don't wish to invest in something which in a tool that will not be used. So that's absolutely key, and that we cannot make any final investments decision in our business if we don't have everything going together, and therefore it's absolutely not natural to impose on the industry to develop something without knowing if it will be used unnecessary or not. So that's something I want to insist on first, but I think everybody understands that the entire CCS value chain is the answer, is key, and we, listening to both Chris and to Cedric, we all agree on that. So that's something we need to work on.
I think Francois Regis might have frozen there. I don't know if it's me.
I think Francois Regis indeed has frozen. Shall we just give him 1 minute, and if he stays frozen? Francois Regis, we can't hear you.
Is it better now?
Now we hear you again. Okay.
I'm sorry for that. It happens sometimes in this office. So hopefully it won't again. Apologies again. So now the question is, what about the 50 million tons? Is it achievable or not? So when you look at, we stacked all the different projects that were being discussed either in operation or whatever advanced phase they were, be it screening, early development, or advanced development phase. If you add them up in the EU, you are reaching 35 million tons in 2030. So we are below the 50 million tons, and the reason for that is, as I was saying before, it's because we're late. we're late. The policy push was not there, should have been there 10 years ago, and therefore the need was not there, not enough at least. If you include Norway plus Iceland, you're reaching the 60 million tons, and that's why your question, Christopher Jones, regarding the EEL relevance is absolutely key. Absolutely, cannot say more. So how to make the 50 million tons, I would say, achievable, and how to make it faster achievable. So we have many, 5 more or less, 4 on this slide and 1 more requirements. So first, I already alluded to it, is that we need to include EEA and UK, because that will help a lot to reach the 50 million tons. The second is the fact that we need urgently to have the member state to organize the tenders, the rounds, to issue the exploration licenses. That's the start of everything, and therefore we need to do that. And that, I saw one of the question in the chat was on the depleted fields, but what is even more promising is on saline aquifers, because they are bigger, and therefore our technical people say it's much more promising. So saline aquifer exploration rounds need to be organized, and we are not used to that. You know, we never looked for saline aquifer. We looked for oil and gas in the past. Third one is how to facilitate and incentivize CO2 storage at member state level. So member state has a clear role to play, and if they don't want to store, as it was mentioned by Cedric before, onshore in their country, therefore they need to have agreement to export it and to offshore it in another country. And then we need coordinated measures at member state level, as I said, even using the competent authority. The competent authority need to have a role to follow up the advancement of each project. It cannot be all done by the king of CCS in Brussels, as you call him, Chris Bolesta. We need to have member state really involved and competent authority involved into that. And if there are hurdles to overcome to make sure that the projects are being rolled out, then how do we do it? How do we address them? And if not, therefore, what is a new date of the project? If it's not 2028, 2030, if it's 2032, and what is the consequence on our targets? And we believe in IOGP Europe that the member state and competent authority should have a clear role in that. And final one is the value chain. We all spoke about it, but the value chain is extremely complex. It involves a lot of actors, not only the capture, the pipe, and the storage. We made a kind of sketch here to show how many people, how many actors could be involved into that. And again, the scope of the Net Zero Strategy project should be beyond the storage alone, as I mentioned. So in conclusion, I would like to say, so first we welcome
I'm afraid you're frozen again, Francois-Regis, but we'll wait a minute or so, because this is the key part. Francois-Regis, I'm afraid you were frozen just when you started your conclusions.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now.
Okay.
So if you want to start again from the conclusions. Yeah,
sorry. So first of all, we welcome, as I said before, the fact that CCS is included very warmly. Even the 50 million ton storage objective is not that easy to reach. When you stack all the projects, even those who have not made their final investment decisions. So there is a gap to fill there. We need long-term contractual arrangements along the value chain. And therefore, we need simple improvements to make sure that we can meet this objective faster. We need competent authority to be involved at member state level. And as it was mentioned before, the funding and de-risking mechanism are really what is much needed there. So I will stop there. A short presentation, a short intro, Chris, and happy to respond to your question.
That was great. Thank you, François-Régis. Can you talk a little bit about your point one, simple improvements into the Net Zero Industry Act to actually achieve? What would they be?
Yeah, the first of all would be to make sure that we could include EEA and UK. One of the first one. The second one would be that the net zero projects are not only storage project, but they strategy project, but they should be also the capture and the transportation ones. For instance, one would be to really make sure that in NECPs, each member state includes CCS in their in the NECPs, and therefore they draw conclusions from it. If it's included, let's organize the exploration rounds to store CO2. So it's not skyrocketing. It's not a rocket science kind of thing, but are very easy win and quick win we need to do, and we need to do them very quickly.
So how does the industry take the Net Zero Industry Act legal obligation target? So I'm trying to get the formulation this right. So there are obviously, so if I understand the Net Zero Industry Act obligation, it says that, let's assume company A has 10% of the oil and gas production in the EU over the period, the last 3 years, whatever it is. It then gets 10% of the storage target. So I'm company A. I produce 10% of the oil and gas over the last 3 years. So therefore, I have a legal obligation to ensure that there's 5 million tons of storage by 2030. How does the industry feel that the act should be done? Because, okay, I'm just trying to think of it practically. Let's assume that the act is adopted as it is today. I go about it and I get on with it, and I'm late with 3 of the projects because I don't get my because you indicated licenses are a problem. I'm late with 3 of my projects by 5 years because I don't get the licenses from the countries in question or whatever. Yeah. How does the industry feel that this balance should be done?
Yeah, first of all, let me tell you that we prefer carrots and sticks in industry, and it's not about only oil and gas industry, but it's industry in general. And so the way it's done is not our preferred way of receiving policy. Receiving obligation to invest is a bit weird, huh? So it's an obligation to invest on a very specific part of the industry, oil and gas industry, to try to, and we know why, it's to try to solve the chicken and egg or the catch-22 situation we are in. So we understand the rationale, no question about it. And as I said, the 50 million tons are pretty reasonable in theory. When you look at what needs to be stored, when you look, be it the European, the net zero emission pathway of the NZIA, or if you look at the Hydrogen for Europe study that was published last year.
I'm afraid you're frozen again, François-Régis. Okay, then what I'll do is I'll loop back to François-Régis a little later, and in the meantime, I'll pass. Are you back with us, François-Régis?
Yes, I am. But,
okay, so we didn't get your answer to the last question.
Yeah. So I was saying that the 50 million tons are pretty reasonable if you compare the European Hydrogen for Europe study or the net zero emission pathway of the EA, both of them are saying that we need to do much bigger storage, CO2 storage volumes. And therefore, it's not a question of the volumes themselves, it's the way it has been done, which is not really satisfactory, because as I said, it's a value chain issue. So we don't want to develop storage volumes if they are not being used. So that's really the value chain vision that is missing, if you allow me, in this proposal, and the co-legislators have to address it. And when you look at the Heller draft report on the discussion at the council, we are reassured because we consider that the value chain approach is really something which is being recognized. And that would be it, Chris, my response to your question.
Terrific. Many thanks, Francois-Xavier. I also have
Welcome. I'm sorry.
Ton more question for you, but sadly, well, not sadly, we have to move on because I can't wait to hear what Jesse has to contribute. Jesse, I guess you're representing a little bit the academic side of the world. Is that fair? Perhaps you'd like to stop sharing, Francois-Xavier. So in the meantime, Jesse, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Chris. As you say, I wear several hats at the moment, so I'm very much speaking in a personal capacity, and that lets me say some thoughts about some of the challenges on this. And it's a pleasure to speak to you all. Of course, many of us have had these conversations together over at least the last 15 years. And as you say, Chris, there is real momentum now. I think the first thing to say is, we all need to remind ourselves that in a net zero energy system, a net zero economy, what we're looking for in the power and industry sectors is not just zero, but actually negative emissions. These sectors have to contribute on the negative side of the net because it will be more difficult to do that, particularly in parts of land use. So I very much take Cedric's point that we're dealing with energy and process emissions. And I very much take the point that we are going to need CO2 removals, and CCUS plays a role in that. Chris Bolester, you mentioned, the different kinds of years, including the Commission year and the importance of speed. The frameworks are moving. What I'm hearing from this debate and what I'm observing is that we now need to look for ways to accelerate that coordination of the value chain that will enable the various investors to have confidence to make the decisions. This is a new value chain. There will be actors in it who don't have existing commercial relationships. How do public jurisdictions sort of increase confidence? What are the kind of, for example, long-term horizontal contracts that could be possible that would enable that to happen? And here I think there are analogies about how natural gas infrastructure was built out over previous decades. I'm a little bit worried looking at the example from hydrogen, the extent to which DG Energy at the Commission has proposed a market design that sort of assumes a mature hydrogen market. This is not a market design that's looking for the growth of a new commodity. And I think there's a lot of concern in the hydrogen community about this, and some of those questions are likely to arise again in the context of CCUS. Behind all of that, Cedric, you've emphasized the high cost of economies of scale. And one of the challenges we're facing both on CCUS and hydrogen is, I think we need to face up to the fact that there will not be universal networks for either across the whole of Europe. Of course there won't. There will be clusters, and those clusters will go for different options and attract different actors to potentially locate activities close to those clusters. And this is a really difficult political discussion to have at EU level and also within some of the member states. because where that infrastructure develops will influence where businesses choose to make next investments. But we can't carry on having a theoretical discussion where we imply that we will have CO2 and hydrogen networks everywhere. We just sort of move forward to this is going to happen here and something different is going to happen somewhere else. That, I think, is also a pattern we're seeing in other parts of the transition, looking at building heat. You know, it's very, very clear now that this is not going to be something we can just do through consumer choice, and Chris Jones chooses to invest in a heat pump one year, and I live in the same city and I choose to invest another year, and Chris Follester lives in the same city and he chooses to wait 2 more years. It's all about grids. And in some areas, an electricity grid will be reinforced such that large numbers of new heat pumps can be connected in 2024, and in another area it will be 2026. And in other areas, there will be opportunities for hydrogen grids, or there will be new geothermal district heating grids. Similarly, on the industrial side, we will see different infrastructures in different places, which will take some element of planning in dialogue with all the various stakeholders. And there's probably a limit to what the EU level, Chris, can do about that, because quite a lot of this is going to happen within national borders. But a comfort level with those conversations and with perhaps some of the market design implications is going to be a next necessary step. I've got one more really framing point, which is a different one. The CBAM has been mentioned. I now do a lot of work listening to key actors across the global south, and it's no news to this group of people. We all know very well that the CBAM has not been well received. Senior Indian ministers are describing it as a protectionist measure disguised as a climate measure, and that's a sentiment in many countries. Please, as the CBAM phases in, let's reach out, encourage the Commission to do this, and propose joint impact assessments with some of those key climate and trade partners to see how it impacts them and how it impacts some of their discussion. And through this, there would not only be some very important relationship repair, but also an opportunity to have dialogues about CCS in some of those key economies, where the scale of what has to happen makes what we're doing in Europe look actually quite small. So if we want a partnership on that conversation in the context of the global emissions budget, this, I think, might be a way in. Back to you, Chris. That was a number of wide points trying to draw together some themes and perhaps add a little bit more of a climate lens on this conversation.
Before I go to the, sorry, we're kind of tangenting a bit to the CBAM in a way as well here and there, because it does have effect, but I would like to ask you a little bit about that and your comment about partnerships. So the CBAM applies to iron and steel products. And so I mean, I like what you say about partnership with in the countries that are going to be hit by the CBAM, to put it simply. So basically it means that Indian steel is going to have to pay an ETS equivalent charge, which, as Cedric says, hopefully, although it's a separate system to the ETS, it will have an equivalent effect, so that the CBAM charge will be the same, more or less, as the ETS price. Now, if I'm correct that Indian steel is basically produced using coal, I mean, even if Cedric, or cement, let's take cement, okay? Even if Cedric does absolutely nothing and just uses natural gas rather than coal, he gets a competitive advantage. So it's going to be kind of tricky to convince these countries that the CBAM is a good idea, isn't it?
I think it's less a question of convincing them that it's a good idea than convincing them that it's not an entirely unilateral European strategy without any basis of consultation and conversation. Because we are in parallel saying, let's sit down and discuss steel, coal, cement. We want to know your plans on developing your carbon market. But meanwhile, we're launching the CBAM and we've made an unsuccessful, possibly a not sufficiently large effort to engage constructively about our objectives there and about understanding its impact and the extent to which it can actually help bring us closer together on some of these sectors and technologies. There is a lively debate on CCS, there is a lively debate on carbon markets, but taking that forward constructively, where it matters more in the global emissions budget in India than it does in Europe, just mathematically. But we are looked at as useful partners who are in the lead to some extent on this. Having that constructive conversation has become more difficult in the context of the way the CBAM decision has been perceived so far. So I think there's some repair work that could be very helpful. And as global companies, I'm sure some of you are also bumping into this issue as you work.
Great. Many thanks. I've got two other questions, and perhaps I'll pose both of them, and you can choose which, both, or either you wish to reply to. So, as we've observed with all the speakers, one of the biggest challenges is creating the entire CCS value chain. We don't just need the storage, we don't just need Piotr's pipes, we don't just need Cedric's capture, we need the whole thing happening together magically. How do you see that the EU should pursue this? Should it be regulation? Should it be public financial support? What should be the mixture policy? That was the first question. Secondly, at the risk of getting into the green hydrogen, blue hydrogen rabbit hole, we've seen the debate in Germany recently on heat pumps, where the German government has tried to say, sorry, no more fossil fuel boilers after next year or whenever it was, and everybody explodes, because it means for citizens, they're going to have to invest vast amounts of money. Sorry, I'm unreasonably encapsulating this. Huge amounts of money in refurbishing their house that they don't have enough money for, and therefore the whole thing has fallen apart. Does that mean that we're going to need lots more hydrogen for heating purposes? Because at the end of the day, people will simply refuse to invest in heat pumps. And does that mean, and we also see in Germany some movements towards blue as well, which has implications for CCS. You see these agreements with Norway. So what's your take on this picture and how it's emerging?
Well, very briefly on the policy toolkit, I'm an all of the above person. Let's have the regulation, let's have the sticks, the carrots, the finance, the everything, because we are trying to do something massive at speed against a non-negotiable deadline. Earth system physics change. So I would like to see all policies available. On the German experience, I mean, Chris, you're summarizing, but actually you're catching some of the flavor, particularly the flavor in the media debate here. Behind the current furore, which will calm down as these things do, I think where we're landing is a realization that there are a number of bureaucratic hurdles. You know, there are subsidies available, but the processing of them is slow. There's a whole set of issues around technicians and skills. So there are a number of things where we can speed up the processes that make the heat pump a viable option. Clearly, there's a huge capex issue. And here I've seen numbers from the Netherlands that imply that while maybe 10% of people live in energy poverty defined as difficulty with bills, around half the population do not have the capital in the bank to change their energy circumstances, to invest in insulation, heat pump, new boiler, etc. So that's where this question has landed in Germany. Will it lead to lots more demand for hydrogen? I'm sure there will be some in heating systems. I think different parts of cities will have hydrogen or go fully electric, or we'll do a lot more with district heat, including new heat grids. And that's how we'll have to balance the heating system. But on the whole, the biggest area of this where I'd like to see more focus is on that district heat opportunity. Because if we are going to need a rapid transition, which builds on the reinforcement of electric grids, which is the other challenge in Germany. If we all installed electric heat pumps today in Berlin, I am not sure that the grid would be coping. If we're going to do that, we might as well have discussions about some of the other grid upgrade, new grid options that we could be looking at. So this will diversify as a discussion. What primarily worries me about it is not actually the technologies or even the costs. It's that we've bumped into a really political take on the energy transition. And one last point, Chris, I think we're moving from a phase where all of us around this table have worked in a somewhat technocratic phase of energy transition. A lot has been able to be done in dialogues between legislative and regulatory institutions and businesses. And we've been able to have discussions and analysis that says a lot of those actions are broadly economically balanced, net positive. You can't say it's all painless, but there isn't profound pain at wide scale. And it hasn't had high electoral salience. Okay, that era is over. We are now moving to the green transition. When we start to talk about net zero, about 2/3 of mitigation actions involve behavior change. If we're going to roll out renewables, we're talking land law. If we're going to do things in buildings, we're talking taxes. We are now getting into a highly political space, which is going to be really, really different to work in and will have electoral salience. So suddenly it matters what political parties think, and not just what they think, but what they think tactically in the context of electoral opportunities. And it matters how the media aligns with those political parties. And that's what we're seeing in Germany on heat, and it's what we're seeing in the Netherlands on nitrogen and farmers. And I think we're going to see a lot more of this across the whole of the net zero agenda around Europe. So let's start watching the politics. And that will have an impact on the space in which we can do things with, you know, the still more technical aspects of the transition, including hydrogen and CCS.
Terrific. Many thanks indeed, Jesse. Now I have to turn to the most important man in the room, because Cedric's going to invest his billions in carbon capture. Francois Regis is going to invest his billions in storage, but if there's no pipes, then it will all be in vain. A question to start you off, Piotr. The floor is yours to tell us how the industry is going to do this. But just to frame the question, so Eric Rakow has posted an advanced question, which please don't necessarily feel the need to answer this as that, but as part of your overall question. In 2010, the EU JRC study set a vision of 20,000 kilometers of CO2 pipelines as highways. 20,000 kilometers. Does that still make sense in terms of a number? And what should we learn from the way in which hydrogen pipeline debate and industry has developed? So I leave you that one. And I'm sure you were going to answer.
I can start with this one. I can already tell you, Chris, and hi, Eric. I think it's a number good as any other number today. We might treat it as an assumption. It shows a scale of thousands of kilometers that have to be either developed or repurposed. But we are working to answer this question correctly, taking into account how we should structure the future of our assets. And as you mentioned, we have to look at at this moment at any given technology that will have the decarbonization. So it might be 20, 25. I don't want to put any number, but the direction is, of course, there that we will need thousands of kilometers of pipelines. Anyhow, coming back to our points, essence, I think that CCS is already an important pathway for decarbonizations that we look as TSO, as an NSOC. It's one of the pathway that we have developed already as our roadmap towards 2050, how we see our assets, infrastructure assets, serving decarbonization. Also, it's a part of the scenario to make this transition to net zero future. And we are really glad that this acceleration and these initiatives are coming in place. To start with our organic working, to basically set the scene for our work, I think it's very important to say that we work on the scenarios for the future, for our system planning to embrace this energy system integration. And of course, we consider growing role of electricity in European mix, looking at, of course, decline of natural gas, but it will still remain important for still some years to come, with growing importance of hydrogen, low carbon gases, biogas, and looking at what will be the needs to repurpose and to prepare the infrastructure towards this transition and new gases. But even taking the most optimistic assumptions for the future, we will still remain with up to 40% of area that we cannot electrify. And this is, I think, very extremely relevant to what Cedric mentioned before, that was said that there we have hard to abate sectors, we have industry that we have to support. And here, let's say, we see CCS as playing a really crucial role to industrial decarbonization. And we think that this net zero industry act is creating very good targets, very good basis to look towards developing big and accelerate big projects for large scale projects of storing CO2. Sorry, but then from infrastructure point of view, we really look towards CCUS strategy to address the framework and to address the targets, to understand what will be the implications for the infrastructure, how it should be developed around the targets, how to connect the things with where we are, let's say, capturing the CO2. And I'm glad to hear Chris here saying that you are in the listening mode, because this is now the listening mode to, let's say, put all these puzzles together and also include the proper framework for the infrastructure. And then without that, we won't fully reap the benefits of CO2. And we already see that, of course, we will start with pipe, well, let's say, place-to-place infrastructure, but we can see that it will grow beyond the borders. And we will have to create some European cross-border solutions due to the fact that not area in Europe is blessed with appropriate storage facilities. Not everywhere we have the big industrial, let's say, clusters to start. So I think it's the time to look how we can do it in the most cost-efficient, also use for the networks, and to contribute to this process. And if we look then a bit zooming in into particular areas that will also touch here today, maybe I will name a few. So, of course, we can look how to set it up in the, let's say, some kind of regulatory frameworks, how to look at what sort of regulation and let's say setup is needed. What probably we'll see at the beginning is that we will see the first clusters, the first big projects that were described here. And we will see first point-to-point solutions starting. But then if we are talking about big time, about thousands of kilometers, probably will gradually evolve towards national, regional setups. And we will certainly arrive at the point that we will have to treat the transportation of CO2 as an issue which is cross-border. And then, of course, we have to adjust the level of regulation. I think that certain flexibility is needed, but then if we arrive to the situation that we have, let's say, some kind of monopolistic situation, and we will have operators to manage the transportation system, then we have to have at least a minimum setup of the rules that will allow for any principles and non-discriminatory and transparent access to such infrastructure, to treat every let's say partner who would like to join and who would like to use the assets to then let's say push its carbon out, to have the good access to the infrastructure, and transparent and non-discriminatory. Secondly, if we look at let's say setting up the governance, and if we look at the experience we can draw from the natural gas market, certainly at the cross-border point, we will have to apply the same principles for let's say, for making the bigger scope of the market working. And of course, we will need more coordination, codes, technical standards that can be already drawn from experience. And here we see NSOC and the operators that will also, in many cases, repurpose their assets to step in and to provide their expertise and already, let's say, the track record of successful developments for the gas market. If we talk the developments, and I think this, some of the success stories, which I also alluded, is to look maybe at the planning. And of course, we here talk about different energy vectors to be shipped to have the infrastructure prepared for them. But we see already that this integration of planning, the coordination, is very needed, because then we can see all the synergies. It's like we have, let's say, many of the assets at our disposal, but then to start thinking how to make it in an efficient manner is to look what areas, what regions, what types of infrastructure can be repurposed, which one can be used, will be used still for natural gas, which one will go for hydrogen, and which can also be used for CO2. And here we have to, let's say, have a holistic view on all these carriers, and then to plan together the repurposing with, of course, integrating the all other partners in the value chain. One of the ideas could be that we can already think how to integrate CO2 into framework of 10-year network development plans on the EU level. So also to have this ingredient included. Secondly, which was also mentioned here, that every process is also very important on the national level. So here we see not only, as it was mentioned, NECPs, but also maybe national development plans that could also be start to include more of the CO2 ingredients. And one thing that is also quite of important is the discussion about onshore, offshore. So also putting together in this planning this offshore ingredients. So if we need pipelines, if we ship CO2 within some different carriers, and as you know now, there is a lot of discussion how to approach this let's say big offshore planning. For the time being, if you look at the 10-year regulation, it's only concentrating on electricity and electrons. So if we have the data, then we can look at how to optimize the planning, how to prepare the transportation. Blue hydrogen might be of importance, because if we know where the blue hydrogen is, it's of course something that will also make this interoperation between hydrogen infrastructure and CO2 infrastructure. Location of CO2 storage and basically geography of location is the first thing to let's say have an integrated planning to think how to de-risk and how to aggregate the processes, and then feed them into, for example, 10 processes that are already being used. A few words maybe on the market. So for us, the market is something very important to set up the stability for the whole value chain. For any infrastructure operators, it will be very important to have long-term commitments and let's say long-term clarity that the infrastructure can work and can serve this new needs for a certain longer period of time. And it has to be the risk at least the first stage. So any support, any instruments that can alleviate the financial pressure should be at place either on European or national level. And my final remark, we won't start any serious journey without, let's say, properly addressing the technical standards. Interoperability between different operators, as it was showed on the Francois Régis graph, quality, purity, harmonization of standards, preparing also for, last but not least, safety and security of the operation of the system and managing the possible leaks. That will also bring clarity, and I think also will be cornerstone to build broader public acceptance for general public to roll out CCUS. Thank you.
Many thanks, Piotr. That was terrific. Can I? I've got so many questions for you, but I'm going to have to limit it to one. So, managing the future grid is looking trickier and trickier. And most of our discussions have been, well, how do you, at least over the last year, how do you manage the link between the gas grid and the hydrogen grid and repurposing and planning? And how do you link that to where you're going to put your electrolyzers and your biomethane? And listening to this, it's all just got a little bit more complicated, because that now you've got the, okay, am I going to use that repurposed pipeline for hydrogen, for CO2? When am I going to do it, etc.? And also, if I recall from the way that the hydrogen thing has developed, so you had the strategy, and then the industry developed the backbone, the hydrogen backbone, which may be correct, may be whatever, but it made a huge step forward in getting people to think, okay, what do we actually need? And the CO2 industry is a bit like the hydrogen industry in terms that you're going to have, at least in the initial 10 years, you're going to have big industrial clusters requiring evacuation from those. Okay, the direction of where you're going to take it is different. So what should be the process to enable us to have a coherent, cost-effective and logical planning procedure in all this?
Well, I think we should really base on the let's say integration we are already doing for different sorts of projects. And I think this is the main challenge for us, because we see only on hydrogen and new gases that you already have different streams of the work collecting the different projects. I would say that we should follow this path of really having this cross value chain dialogue, and let's say starting with really mapping and enabling the biggest and the, let's say, prime movers, so the biggest and the first sectors that are already coming on stream with the let's say capturing projects, and trying to let's say match them with where the offtake is. And then when we have this let's say locations volumes, we can assess what is the existing and what is the extra need for the infrastructure in the certain areas, sort of, let's say, putting it on the map where we have the existing pipelines, and let's discussing then what part of them can be reused, or how it also then relates to existing hydrogen needs. This is the planning. So it's, for us, it's an extra layer of the work we have to put on our mapping and then system planning, and then it will let's say give us a response. Is it to repurpose? Is it to add some new infrastructure to join the producers of CO2 with the things?
Many thanks indeed, Piotr. Chris, Cedric, Francois-Regis, Jess, Piotr, many thanks. I personally really enjoyed that, and I learned a lot. Thank you so much. Andries, I pass to you for the conclusions and wrap up.
Yeah, well, I think I should start with thanking. I would thank Christopher, you for really fantastic moderating the panel, because the questions have been exactly to the point. There is slight disagreement, but we can talk it later. It's about parallels between hydrogen approach and CO2. I would say there are some similarities, but a lot of differences as well. But that's the only point that I would say I would slightly disagree with your driving the process. We have had terrific speakers, and I would slightly go for what I have taken from the debate. Some points I would go beyond. There have been recent publication by European Scientific Advisory Board on climate change with 90% target for 2040. And if you look on the scenarios that have been developed, and it's really piece of art how they did it, CCS plays very big role. Enormous role. They don't say exactly how you get there, but you clearly see by volumes 300 million tons at least, so that you need to store. So that is very clear, or they built by scientific consensus. The second, I believe that we should try to avoid this debate, and I think Cedric proposed a formula. There is unavoidable CO2 emissions that we should really to store. Why we need to do it? We have announced strategic autonomy. So there is very clear also political or geopolitical goals that we can't allow that industries moves away. So that is very clear that There are CO2 emissions and we need to deal with them, and CCS is the way really how we should deal with this. Then there was good news for me from Cedric saying that ETS and CBAM gives enough incentive really to work for it. So I think that is already good news. At least the part industry says this carbon price is really good enough for us. We have more or less in the industry consensus. But what Cedric said, I think that's where the biggest challenge is. It's a new value chain, completely new value chain, and adding on top from François Régis, the risking instruments, and also from François Régis, different member states involved. This makes it very, very tricky. And that's why I would say we can't go exactly like hydrogen. I would follow perhaps Cedric, suggest to follow Cedric's example. One of two big mature projects, and really you play out the whole value chain. Where you need the risking, where is the challenge, and how you address it. Because if you have understanding how it will work for one big project or two big projects, you could imagine for broader regulatory framework. Because there, I would say that broader regulatory framework should follow when you know how the value chain will evolve and what type of de-risking you really need in this process. Because if you go classical way, like was hydrogen doing for following natural gas, it's not exactly the same story, at least from my understandings. That is slightly different point of departure and different goal at the end of the day. So in a way, I believe that on CCS, we could move faster than on hydrogen, because hydrogen in a big part depends how demand will evolve. So, and there will be different patterns in different places. Here we already know what actually need to be abated, and we know that some of it should be stored in the storage capacity. And good news that industry says basically we have already 35 million tons CO2 injection capacity in existing projects. 15 million could be added if there is a need. But basically, there is not this challenge. So the real issue is this new value chain, for me at least, that comes from this debate, because different elements already falls in place, but all together need to be still addressed. So thank you very much. It was fantastic debate also from Christopher's moderation. I really enjoyed. I learned also how to moderate the debates. So perhaps I will improve in the future. And also we have fantastic audience. I saw questions. So please, the ones that have been mentioned in the questions, have a look. Perhaps you or some of your staff could answer the questions that have been in question box that have not been addressed during our debate. Thank you, and then look forward to come to the next debate on CCS, perhaps on some very particular issues that deserve more closer attention. Thank you, and see you for our next debates.
Thank you, everyone.